A fiery sunset bleeds across the New York financial district. Julian walks heavily through the crowd, clutching a cardboard box filled with his humble belongings. He has just been fired from his job as a security guard for a mistake he did not commit. As he waits at a red light, a roar tears the sky apart. Two sleek black helicopters descend onto the avenue, creating a localized hurricane. Agents leap out, shouting into the panicked crowd. "We found him! Doctor, please! Her life is in your hands!" Julian looks at his rough, calloused palms, then at the sky. The past he tried to bury has finally caught up. Before we discover who Julian truly is, please let me know where you are watching from. Your presence inspires us to tell these stories. Do not forget to like and subscribe so you do not miss the conclusion. The city of New York never apologizes for its coldness, and today, it felt especially frigid for Julian. He walked with his head down, the cardboard box in his arms feeling heavier with every block. Inside were the meager remnants of his life as a security guard, a plastic water bottle, a stained notebook, and a framed photograph of a little girl with a crooked smile. Just an hour ago, he had been a man with a paycheck. Now, he was just another shadow blending into the gray concrete of Manhattan. Julian lived in a cramped fifth-floor walk-up where the heater groaned but never quite produced warmth. But as he opened the door, the chill in his bones vanished. A small, vibrant force of nature crashed into his knees. Lily, his 6-year-old daughter, looked up at him with eyes that were far too bright for a child who spent so much time in hospital corridors. "Daddy, you are home early," she chirped, though her breath was a bit shallow. Julian forced a smile, tucking the cardboard box behind the door so she wouldn't see. He picked her up, noting with a pang of fear how light she felt. Lily had been born with a rare, complex heart defect, a ticking clock that Julian had spent every waking second trying to slow down. His low-wage job at the monolithic Sterling Tower had been his only lifeline. It provided the insurance and the extra shifts he needed to keep her treatments going. He didn't mind the long hours or the way the executives looked through him as if he were made of glass. He did it all for her. But today, that lifeline had been snapped. Julian had been fired because he refused to sign off on a falsified safety report for the building's new wing. He had chosen his integrity over his livelihood, and the vice president of the company had enjoyed watching him walk out. As Julian sat at the small kitchen table, staring at a stack of unpaid medical bills, the ghosts of his former life began to whisper. Long before he was a nameless guard in a blue uniform, Julian was a man of prestige. In the hushed, sterile halls of military surgical units, he had been known as the Weaver. He possessed a legendary ability to suture vessels that other surgeons deemed impossible. He had been a colonel, a savior, a man who moved with the confidence of a god. But that confidence had died on a dusty battlefield in the Middle East. He had spent 14 hours trying to save his wife, Sarah, who was a trauma nurse in his unit. He had used every ounce of his genius, every drop of his strength. But in the end, her heart had stopped beneath his hands. That day, Julian made a vow. He washed the blood from his fingers and swore he would never hold a scalpel again. He traded his surgical scrubs for a security uniform, seeking a quiet, invisible life where no one's survival depended on his skill. He was shaken from his thoughts by a soft cough. Lily was leaning against the table, holding a drawing of a superhero. "Is something wrong, Daddy?" "No, sweetheart," he lied, his voice thick. I just have more time to play with you now." He felt like a failure. He had $42 in his bank account and a daughter whose heart was failing. He decided to take her for a walk, wanting to feel the fresh air before he had to figure out how to tell her they might lose the apartment. As they walked toward the park, Julian spotted a sleek black car stalled on the shoulder of the road. A woman was standing by the door, looking shaken. He recognized her instantly. It was Evelyn, the brilliant but distant CEO of the very corporation that had just fired him. She didn't recognize him, of course, but Julian noticed the smoke coming from her engine and the way she was clutching her chest. He didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, checked the engine, and calmly told her how to stabilize the vehicle until help arrived. He didn't tell her who he was. He didn't tell her she had just authorized his termination. He simply helped because it was in his nature. Evelyn had looked at him then, really looked at him, seeing the strength in his weathered face before he walked away into the crowd. Now, standing on that street corner as the two helicopters descended, Julian realized that his quiet life was over. The agents surrounded him, their faces pale with desperation. They didn't see a fired security guard. They saw the only man on Earth who could do the impossible. "Colonel Julian," the lead agent shouted over the deafening roar of the rotors. "Evelyn Sterling has been attacked. She is dying. There is no one else. You have to come with us." Julian looked down at Lily, who was clinging to his hand, her eyes wide with wonder as she looked at her father. The man who had been forgotten by the world was being summoned back to the light. The roar of the helicopter blades was so intense it felt like the very air was being shredded. The crowd on the sidewalk pushed back in a wave of panic and awe, but Julian stood rooted to the spot. The lead agent, a man with a jagged scar across his temple named Miller, stepped forward. He didn't look at Julian's tattered cardboard box or his faded security jacket. He looked into Julian's eyes and snapped a crisp, military salute. "Colonel, we do not have time for a debate," Miller shouted over the thunder of the engines. "The CEO was targeted in a coordinated strike on the way to the helipad. A piece of shrapnel is lodged 3 millimeters from her primary coronary artery. 3 surgeons at the city hospital have already refused the case. They say she is already a ghost, but we know better. We know about the Weaver." Julian felt the old, cold, familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He looked at Lily, who was staring at the sleek, black machines with her mouth open. She had only ever seen her father as a man who fixed leaky faucets and walked her to school. Now, she saw men in tactical gear looking at him as if he were a king returned from exile. "I cannot leave my daughter," Julian said, his voice ringing out with a newfound authority that made Miller blink. "She comes with us," Miller replied instantly. "The site is secure. Move, now." Within seconds, Julian and Lily were whisked upward. The city of New York's shat fell away, becoming a grid of flickering lights beneath them. Inside the cabin of the primary helicopter, the atmosphere was frantic. Evelyn Sterling lay on a high-tech gurney, her skin the color of ash. A portable monitor beeped with a frantic, irregular rhythm that Julian recognized instantly as the sound of a heart losing its fight. A young medic was trying to stem the bleeding, his hands shaking. When he saw Julian enter, he looked confused. "Who is this? We need a surgeon, not a civilian." Miller pushed the medic aside. "Shut up and give him the tray. This is Colonel Julian Vance. He has forgotten more about trauma surgery than you will ever learn." Julian didn't wait for an invitation. He knelt beside the woman who had, only hours ago, been the symbol of his misfortune. He looked at Evelyn. In the harsh LED lights of the helicopter, she didn't look like a powerful billionaire. She looked like a human being in desperate need of a miracle. He reached out and took her hand. Her pulse was a thready, dying flutter. Julian closed his eyes for a split second. The smell of the cabin, the metallic scent of blood and the sterile tang of antiseptic triggered a flood of memories. He saw the desert. He saw his wife's face. He felt the phantom scalpel in his hand. "I promised I would never do this again," Julian whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the rotors. He was talking to the memory of his wife. "But I cannot let another one go. Not tonight." He turned to the medic, his eyes turning into shards of ice. "I need a local anesthetic, a number 10 blade, and a rib spreader. We are not waiting until we land. If I do not stabilize this vessel in the next 5 minutes, she will be dead before the wheels touch the roof." The medic gasped. "Operating in flight? That is suicide. The turbulence will have to wait for me," Julian snapped. As Julian began the delicate process of prepping the site, Lily sat in the corner of the cabin, strapped into a jump seat. A veteran agent sat beside her, but she didn't look at him. She watched her father. She watched the way his hands, which were usually so gentle when he braided her hair, became instruments of absolute precision. He didn't look like a security guard anymore. He looked like a warrior. "Is my daddy a hero?" Lily whispered to the agent. The agent, a man who had seen 100 battles, looked at Julian with pure reverence. "Little lady, your daddy is the man death is afraid of." The helicopter hit a pocket of rough air, jolting everyone inside. But Julian's hands didn't move an inch. He had braced his forearms against the gurney, his body absorbing the vibration while his fingers remained perfectly still. With a single, fluid motion, he made the primary incision. Evelyn's eyes fluttered open for a brief, agonizing second. Through the haze of pain and shock, she saw Julian. She recognized the man from the roadside, the man she had allowed her company to discard like trash. She saw the intensity in his gaze, a mixture of fierce determination and a strange, haunting empathy. She realized, in that moment of near death, that the man she had looked down upon was the only one capable of lifting her back into the world of the living. "Stay with me, Evelyn," Julian commanded, his voice a steady anchor in the chaos. "I have you. I am not letting go." He worked with a speed that defied logic, his fingers moving like a pianist's. He bypassed the damaged vessel with a temporary shunt, his movements so sure that the monitor's frantic beeping began to slow into a stable, rhythmic pulse. As the helicopter banked sharply to land on the roof of the private medical center, Julian finally pulled his hands away. He was covered in sweat and blood, his old security uniform stained and torn. But as he looked down at Evelyn, he saw the color returning to her lips. The doors burst open, and a team of top-tier surgeons rushed out, expecting to find a corpse. Instead, they found Julian Vance standing over a stabilized patient. The lead surgeon, a man Julian recognized from his old life, stopped in his tracks, his eyes bulging. "Vance? Is that you? We heard you disappeared." Julian didn't answer him. He simply stepped aside as they took the gurney, then walked over to Lily. He picked her up, burying his face in her hair. The security guard was gone. The doctor had returned. But as the adrenaline began to fade, Julian realized that saving Evelyn was only the beginning of a much larger war. The white corridors of the Sterling private medical wing were silent, save for the rhythmic, electronic pulse of life support machines. This was a world of hushed whispers and expensive marble, a far cry from the cramped apartment where Julian and Lily had spent their nights. Following the surgery, the world outside was in an uproar, but inside these walls, time seemed to slow down. Julian sat by Evelyn's bed, not as a guest, but as the only person the security detail trusted to be near her. He had traded his blood-stained security shirt for a simple set of blue scrubs. His hands, though clean now, still felt the phantom heat of the surgery. He watched the monitor, his eyes tracking every wave and spike with a precision that no machine could replicate. He wasn't caring for a CEO. He was tending to a soul he had dragged back from the precipice. Evelyn woke on the third morning. The harsh sunlight of New York filtered through the specialized glass, casting long, golden shadows across the room. When her eyes found Julian, she didn't see a subordinate. She saw the man who had stood in the eye of the storm and refused to blink. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice like dry parchment. "The doctors, they told me what you did in the air. They called it a miracle." Julian didn't look up from the chart he was reviewing. "It wasn't a miracle, Evelyn. It was physics and a bit of stubbornness. You had a will to live that made my job easier." Evelyn watched him, her mind racing through the memories of the past few months. "My company fired you. I signed the budget cuts that led to your department's restructuring. I let them treat you like you were invisible. Why didn't you let me go?" Julian finally looked at her. His eyes were tired, etched with the weight of 1,000 surgeries and a lifetime of loss. "Because I don't save bank accounts, Evelyn. I save people. And because my daughter was watching, I wanted her to see that a man's worth isn't defined by how he is treated, but by how he chooses to act when the world is falling apart." As the days turned into a week, the hospital room transformed into a strange, sanctuary-like home. Because Julian refused to leave Evelyn's side, and because he refused to leave Lily alone, the little girl became a permanent fixture in the recovery suite. It was a sight that the hospital staff had never seen before. Evelyn Sterling, the ice queen of the corporate world, began to thaw. She spent her afternoons propped up on silk pillows, listening to Lily explain the intricate backstories of her superhero drawings. Lily didn't care about Evelyn's billions or her influence. To Lily, Evelyn was simply a friend who needed help getting better. "Does your heart hurt like mine does?" Lily asked one afternoon, sitting on the edge of the hospital bed with a crayon in her hand. Evelyn paused, a lump forming in her throat. "In a different way, Lily. But your daddy fixed the broken parts. He's very good at that." "He's the best," Lily said proudly. "He says that even when things are broken, they can still be beautiful. He says that's what scars are for. They are maps of where we've been." Evelyn looked at Julian, who was standing by the window, watching the city below. She realized then that she had been surrounded by people her entire life, yet she had never been more alone than Julian and Lily were in their poverty. She began to ask Julian about his past, and slowly, the wall of silence he had built began to crumble. He told her about the sandstorms in the Middle East. He told her about Sarah, the way she laughed at his bad jokes, and the way she could calm a room full of wounded soldiers just by walking in. He spoke of the night he lost her, the words coming out as if they were being pulled from a deep, dark well. "I thought that if I stopped being a doctor, I could stop the pain," Julian confessed, his voice low. "I thought if I made myself small, the world couldn't take anything else from me. I wanted Lily to have a normal father, not a man haunted by the people he couldn't save." Evelyn reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she touched his arm. "Julian, you didn't make yourself small. You made yourself a shield. But look at Lily. She doesn't love you because you're a security guard or a colonel. She loves you because you are a man who never gives up on what is right." She took a deep breath, the pain in her chest now only a dull ache. "I was wrong about so many things. I thought success was a mountain you climbed alone. I thought people were resources to be managed. But staying here, watching you care for me without asking for a single cent, it has shown me that I was the one who was poor, not you." The healing wasn't just physical. As Evelyn grew stronger, she began to use her resources to secretly investigate the mistake that had led to Julian's firing. She worked from her laptop in the middle of the night, uncovering a web of corruption within her own board of directors, a group of men who had orchestrated the hit on her life and used Julian as a scapegoat for their safety violations. One evening, Julian brought Lily a small treat, a single cupcake from a bakery down the street. He divided it into 3 equal pieces. They sat there, the billionaire, the fallen surgeon, and the little girl with the tired heart, sharing a simple dessert in the quiet of the night. "When I get out of here," Evelyn said, looking at the two of them, "things are going to change. Not just for me, but for this city." Julian shook his head. "I don't want a reward, Evelyn. I just want to take Lily home and find a way to pay for her next surgery. That is all I have ever wanted." "You already have the reward, Julian," Evelyn said softly, watching Lily fall asleep in the chair. "You have your soul back. And as for Lily, she isn't just your responsibility anymore. She is part of the reason I am still breathing." In the silence that followed, Julian realized that the healing he had sought in the shadows was finally happening in the light. He had spent years trying to bury the doctor, but the doctor was the very thing that had saved him. He looked at Evelyn, no longer seeing a boss or a patient, but a partner in a battle they were only just beginning to understand. The quiet days of the hospital were coming to an end, and the storm of the real world was waiting just outside the door. But for the first time in 10 years, Julian Vance wasn't afraid of the wind. The peaceful sanctuary of the hospital wing was shattered when the digital screens in the lobby erupted with breaking news. A grainy video had been leaked, the footage of the black helicopters descending into the heart of Manhattan. The world was demanding to know who the mystery doctor was. But while the public was mesmerized by the heroics, a darker plot was reaching its boiling point within the walls of Sterling Tower. Evelyn, now strong enough to stand, sat at a desk in her suite, her eyes flashing with a cold, predatory light that Julian had not seen before. She had uncovered the truth. The vice president of the corporation, a man named Marcus Thorne, had not only orchestrated the safety cover-up that Julian refused to sign, but he had also funded the accident that nearly cost Evelyn her life. Thorne was preparing to trigger a morality clause in the company's charter to seize control, claiming Evelyn was medically unfit to lead. "He thinks he has won," Evelyn said, her voice like tempered steel. "He thinks because he has the board of directors in his pocket, he can erase us. He doesn't realize that he didn't just fire a security guard. He ignited a war with the wrong man." Julian stood by the window, his arms crossed. He felt the old familiar pull of the shadows. "I am not a politician, Evelyn. I am a surgeon and a father. My instinct is to take Lily and disappear before the cameras find us. I don't want her life to be a circus." Lily was sitting on the rug, playing with a set of toy soldiers the agents had bought for her. She looked up at her father. "Are you going back to the dark, Daddy? Or are we going to help the lady?" Julian looked at his daughter's pale face, then at Evelyn's determined gaze. He realized that running would only teach Lily how to hide, not how to stand. If he wanted to protect Lily's future, he had to destroy the corruption that threatened it. "What do you need me to do?" Julian asked, his voice a low rumble of commitment. "I am holding a global press conference in 2 hours," Evelyn replied. "Thorne thinks I am still in a coma. He is currently standing in the Sterling Auditorium, preparing to announce his takeover. We are going to walk through the front door." The arrival at Sterling Tower was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Julian did not wear his old security uniform, nor did he wear a suit. He wore his tactical military fatigues, the ones Miller had retrieved from a storage unit. He looked every bit the colonel he was, a man of iron and silver. Beside him, Evelyn wore a dress of deep crimson, her posture perfect despite the bandages beneath her silk clothes. As they entered the auditorium, the atmosphere was electric. Marcus Thorne was at the podium, a fake tear in his eye as he spoke to a sea of reporters about the tragic decline of their CEO. "It is with a heavy heart," Thorne droned, "that we must announce the permanent transition of power. The only thing transitioning today, Marcus, is you, into a prison cell." The room went dead silent as Evelyn's voice rang out from the back of the hall. The sea of reporters parted like the Red Sea. Evelyn walked down the center aisle, but all eyes were on the man flanking her. Julian moved with the silent, lethal grace of a predator. His presence was so commanding that the private security guards Thorne had hired, men who had been Julian's peers only weeks ago, lowered their heads and stepped aside. They knew who he was now. Thorne turned pale, his hands gripping the podium until his knuckles turned white. "Evelyn, this is a medical miracle, but you are unstable. And who is this criminal you've brought into our halls?" Evelyn stepped onto the stage and took the microphone. She didn't look at the cameras. She looked at the board members sitting in the front row. "This criminal is Colonel Julian Vance," Evelyn announced, her voice echoing across the globe. "The man you fired for having more integrity than this entire room combined. The man who performed a life-saving surgery in the middle of a hurricane while your hand-picked vice president was paying for my assassination." She signaled to the large screen behind her. A series of documents, bank transfers, and recorded phone calls, the evidence Julian's military contacts had helped gather, flashed before the world. The evidence was undeniable. Thorne's empire of lies crumbled in seconds. The room erupted into chaos. Federal agents, led by Miller, moved in to take Thorne into custody. As Thorne was being led away in handcuffs, he lunged toward Julian, shouting insults about disgraced soldiers and worthless guards. Julian didn't flinch. He simply caught Thorne's arm with a grip that could crush bone and leaned in close. "You told me the day you fired me that I was a nobody. You were wrong. I am the man who sees everything, and I see exactly what you are." He let go, and Thorne was dragged away. Evelyn turned to the cameras, but then she reached out and pulled Julian to the center of the stage. Lily ran up from the wings, and Julian hoisted her onto his shoulder. The image of the billionaire CEO, the warrior surgeon, and the little girl became an instant icon of justice. "Many have asked if Colonel Vance will return to the medical field," Evelyn said to the reporters. But Julian has taught me that the world doesn't just need doctors. It needs protectors. Julian, I am asking you here, in front of everyone. If you will not be a surgeon for the elite, will you be the director of the Sterling Foundation? Will you help me build a world where no one has to choose between their life and their paycheck? Julian looked at Lily. She was beaming, her small hand resting on his head. He looked at Evelyn, seeing the genuine hope in her eyes. He realized he could no longer be a man of the shadows. He had a duty to the living. I have spent 10 years running from my name, Julian said into the microphone, his voice steady and calm. I am done running. If it means protecting people like my daughter and people like Evelyn, then I am exactly where I need to be. The applause was deafening, a roar of approval that shook the very foundations of the tower. Julian walked off the stage, not as a fired guard, but as a man who had reclaimed his throne. He had found justice, but more importantly, he had found a reason to lead again. 3 months have passed, and the skyline of New York looks different now. Not because the buildings have changed, but because the spirit beneath them has shifted. The cold, steel corridors of Sterling Tower have been replaced by the warm, inviting glass of a new sanctuary. Today is the grand opening of the Sarah Vance Memorial Medical Center, a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to treating children with rare cardiac conditions, regardless of their family's ability to pay. Julian stands in the grand atrium, looking up at the high ceiling where sunlight pours in like a benediction. He is dressed in a charcoal suit that fits his broad shoulders perfectly. But if you look closely, you can still see the old, scuffed boots of a security guard peeking out from beneath his trousers. He wears them as a reminder of where he came from, and of the man he promised never to forget. Beside him stands Evelyn. Her recovery is complete, but she is a different woman than the one who sat in the back of a limousine 3 months ago. She no longer looks through people. She looks into them. She has stepped down as the CEO of the main conglomerate to chair the foundation, choosing a life of impact over a life of mere profit. The board still complains about the costs, Evelyn says with a soft laugh, leaning closer to Julian. They say we are giving away too much for free. Julian smiles, a genuine expression that finally reaches his eyes. Tell them that the cost of a life cannot be calculated on a spreadsheet. I think they learned that lesson the hard way. Just then, the sound of laughter echoes through the hall. Lily comes running across the marble floor, her face glowing with health. 2 weeks ago, Julian had performed the surgery his hands were born for. He had operated on his own daughter, his legendary Weaver technique, finally mending the tiny heart that had been failing for so long. Now, she moves with a vitality that brings tears to the eyes of the staff watching her. Lily stops between Julian and Evelyn, taking a hand of each. She looks up at the large portrait of her mother, Sarah, which hangs in the place of honor. Do you think Mommy likes the flowers, Daddy? She asks, pointing to the massive garden in the center of the lobby. I think she loves them, Lily, Julian whispers, squeezing her hand. And I think she's proud that we finally found our way home. Julian looks up toward the sky through the glass roof. In the distance, the faint hum of a helicopter can be heard. Once, that sound was a harbinger of war and a trigger for his deepest traumas. Now, it is the sound of a life being saved, of another child being rushed to a place where they will be fought for. He realizes now that being fired was not the end of his story. It was the necessary spark that burned away the shadows of his guilt. He had to lose his badge to find his heart. He had to walk home in the rain to find the path back to the light. It is time for the ribbon cutting, Colonel, Evelyn says, her voice full of warmth. Julian nods, taking a deep breath of the sterile, hopeful air. He walks forward, flanked by the 2 people who saved him as much as he saved them. The forgotten man is gone. In his place stands a father, a protector, and a healer. As he looks at his daughter's radiant smile, he knows that the storm has finally passed. And for the first time in 10 years, the view from the top is perfectly clear. If you believe that every act of kindness returns to you when you need it most, please press subscribe to support our storytelling journey. Thank you for being a part of this miracle. We will see you in the next story.